On Christmas, it was my own son who laughed the loudest when I was humiliated. That night, they left me out in a snowstorm. The next day, I didn't just leave them, I erased them from my life, started fresh at 66, and wrote them right out of a $6 million inheritance. And let me tell you, it was the best thing I ever did. My name is Martha Vance, and I'm a 76-year-old widow. Folks tend to think old mothers are a burden, and my story, which took place 10 years back in Illinois, is here to show you just how wrong they are. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to listen to more meaningful life stories with us. Your support is our biggest motivation to keep sharing. The first snowflakes of Christmas Eve had just started to fall as I drove to my son Kevin's house. They swirled in the golden glow of the streetlights, a silent, pure dance that promised a white blanket over the world by morning. Inside the warm car, I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, feeling that familiar tremor in my left hand. Parkinson's. The disease had arrived like an uninvited guest, a constant reminder of the body's fragility, something my daughter-in-law, Tiffany, never seemed to let me forget. Their mansion in Naperville came into view, lit up like a jewel in the night. Thousands of tiny lights were wrapped around the trees, the eaves, and the window frames, a lavish display that I knew all too well who had quietly paid for. The laughter of my two grandchildren, Lily and Noah, reached me as I stepped out of the car. For a moment, my heart warmed. For them, I could put up with anything. "Grandma's here!" Noah, my energetic 8-year-old, launched himself at me for a hug. Lily, his more quiet and thoughtful 11-year-old sister, just smiled and gently took the gift bag from my hands. "It's cold out, isn't it, Grandma?" she asked, her eyes clear and full of a genuine concern that was all too rare in this house. Stepping inside, the warmth from the fireplace and the aroma of roast beef mingled with the scent of pine from the enormous Christmas tree. Kevin came out of the living room, a glass of red wine in his hand. "Mom, you made it," my son said, his voice still carrying that charm that once made me so proud, but now felt so distant. He gave me a brief, indifferent hug, a quick pat on the back, and then stepped away. And then Tiffany appeared, perfect as a picture. Her blonde hair was swept up in an elaborate bun, a deep red velvet dress clinging to her slender frame, her ruby red lips always curved into a smile carefully calculated for her Instagram photos. "Mother," she said, her voice sweet but entirely lacking warmth. "Welcome to a Vance Christmas. You look tired." That was how she always started, with a remark cloaked in concern that was really a judgment. I just smiled. A smile I'd practiced 1,000 times. "I'm fine, the roads were just a little slick." Dinner was served at the long oak dining table. Everything glittered, the silverware, the crystal glasses, and the gold-rimmed china Tiffany had bought just last week. When I reached out to help her pass the salad bowl, Tiffany gently pulled it away. "You just rest, Mom," she said, just loud enough for Kevin to hear. "With your hands shaking like that, I'm just afraid you'll drop my new dishes. They were terribly expensive." My left hand froze in midair. The tremors seemed to worsen under her gaze. I quietly drew my hand back, placing it in my lap, trying to still it with my right. She hadn't offered help. She had passed a sentence. Kevin said nothing to defend me. He just took a sip of his wine, his eyes fixed elsewhere, as if this little exchange had nothing to do with him. For a split second, I saw flashes of the double shifts I worked at the hospital, the long nights I went without rest to pay for his college, to give him the very life he was now enjoying. And this was how he repaid me with silent complicity. The meal was a performance of false cheer. Tiffany was constantly taking pictures, directing everyone how to smile, how to hold their forks to capture the perfect family moment. Kevin went on and on about his latest achievements at work, his plans for extravagant trips in the coming year. I sat there, chewing my food mechanically, feeling like a bit player in a strange show, a show about the very life I had sacrificed everything to build. After dinner came the presents. Colorful boxes were piled high under the tree. Lily and Noah squealed with delight as they tore open the latest tech gadgets. Kevin gave Tiffany a sparkling diamond bracelet. Tiffany gave Kevin a limited edition Swiss watch. Finally, when nearly all the expensive gifts had been opened, Tiffany turned to me, holding out a small box wrapped in the cheapest paper. "This is for you," she said with a smile I knew was fake. "It's just a bit of fun. Why don't you read it out loud for everyone?" I hesitated. A knot of unease tightened in my chest, but the expectant look in the children's eyes and Kevin's prodding glance made it impossible to refuse. I slowly opened the box. Inside was nothing but a small, shoddily homemade card. I took a deep breath and began to read the messy handwriting aloud. "Roses are red, the snow outside is white." I paused, my voice catching. My heart began to pound. "Keep going, Mom," Kevin urged, a wide grin spreading across his face. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to read the last line, each word like a shard of glass scraping my throat. Christmas would be better without a shaky grandma in sight. Silence fell over the room for a heart-stopping second, a heavy, awful silence, and then it was shattered by my own son's laughter. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a deep, hearty belly laugh, the kind he let out when he was watching a comedy. Tiffany joined in, a high, piercing sound. Even her sister, who had joined us for dinner, clapped and said, "Oh, Tiffany, you're awful." But her tone was full of delight. My world blurred. The lights on the Christmas tree swam together into a smear of color. The glitter from the card sprinkled onto my wool dress like cruel confetti from a party I didn't belong to. I looked up at Kevin, the son I had raised on my own, the boy for whom I had given up my own dreams. He was looking at me, not with remorse, but with the gleam of someone enjoying a long-awaited punchline. Only Lily wasn't laughing. She stared at me, her big eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and hurt. She looked like she was about to cry. It was her gaze that pulled me back from the brink of breaking down. I couldn't let my granddaughter see me fall apart. To break the awkward silence and lighten the mood, Tiffany clapped her hands and announced, "All right, everyone, time for the traditional Vance family Christmas treasure hunt." It was a game they had started a few years back. A special gift would be hidden somewhere in the large backyard, and everyone had to search for it. I felt exhausted and just wanted to go home, but Kevin was already up, draping my heavy coat over my shoulders. "Come on, Mom, a little fresh air will do you good. Don't be a party pooper." Once again, I had no choice. Refusing would only reinforce their image of me as a difficult, overly sensitive old woman. I let them lead me out into the backyard, where the snow was already thick on the ground, and the December chill of Chicago felt like it was freezing my bones. The game was a chaotic mess of feigned excitement. Tiffany shouted directions, and Kevin acted childishly competitive. I just trailed behind, trying to keep my balance on the slippery snow. Finally, Kevin found the treasure, a bottle of expensive single malt scotch hidden under a pine bush. "I win!" he yelled, holding his prize aloft. Everyone cheered. In the thrill of victory, Kevin and Tiffany led the charge back inside to enjoy the spoils. Noah and Lily scampered after their parents. I moved slower, my left hand aching from the cold. When I was just a few feet from the back door, I heard a click. The door had shut. And then, a small but sharp sound cut through the quiet winter night, the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place. At first, I thought it was just a mistake. I walked up and knocked gently. No one answered. I knocked harder. Still, only silence, answered by the whistling of the wind through the bare tree branches. I pressed my face against the freezing glass of the door. Inside, a cozy scene unfolded. The family had gathered around the fireplace. Kevin was opening the scotch, Tiffany pouring it into crystal glasses. The kids were playing on the thick rug. The sound of soft Christmas music and their laughter drowned out any noise from the outside. They had forgotten me. I stood there, alone in the dark and the cold. The snow began to fall harder, big, heavy flakes clinging to my hair and coat. I knocked again, this time with my fist, but it was no use. I was a ghost, an invisible woman looking in on her own family's world from the outside. The cold seeped through my coat, through my sweater, deep into my muscles. But that physical cold was nothing compared to the icy chill spreading from the depths of my heart. This wasn't forgetfulness, this was a statement. I wasn't just a burden or a joke, I simply didn't exist in their perfect world. My presence was so faint that my absence caused no ripple at all. They didn't need me, they didn't want me. In that moment, standing in the middle of a howling snowstorm, a truth as brutal and as clear as crystal dawned on me. The love I thought was unconditional was actually just a limited tolerance, and tonight, that limit had been reached. I don't know how long I stood there. 10 minutes? Half an hour? An hour? Time seemed to freeze. My fingers and toes had gone completely numb. The tremor was no longer just in my left hand. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably. I just stood there, staring at the warm lights in the window, feeling the life in me slowly fading with my body heat. Then, suddenly, the door flew open. Kevin stood there, a look of genuine surprise on his face as he saw me, a living snow woman on his doorstep. "Mom? What are you doing out here?" Before I could answer, Tiffany pushed past him. She looked me up and down, and instead of an apology, instead of remorse, what came out of her mouth was a clumsily disguised accusation. "Oh my God, Mom," she exclaimed, her tone a mix of annoyance and condescension. "Why didn't you knock louder, or call us? Honestly, sometimes you're so quiet we just forget you're even there. It's really your own fault." My own fault. Those 3 words drilled into my mind. My fault for getting old. My fault for getting sick. My fault for becoming invisible through my own sacrifice. I didn't say a word. I just walked past them, my body stiff with cold and something far beyond anger. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. As I passed through the living room, the heat from the fire washed over me, but it couldn't warm me anymore. This house, with all its fake splendor, was now the coldest place on earth. I walked straight up to the guest room and closed the door. I didn't take off my coat. I just sat on the edge of the bed, watching the snow from my boots melt into a small puddle on the expensive Persian rug. In the silence of that room, a decision was made. The guest room was dark, save for the pale moonlight filtering through the window, casting strange shapes on the bland beige walls. I sat motionless on the edge of the bed, my damp coat clinging to me. Outside, the blizzard raged on, the wind whistling through the window frames like a mournful cry. I could hear the faint sound of Christmas music from downstairs, turned down low, punctuated by an occasional laugh, clear proof that their lives were continuing on perfectly, even after a family member had nearly frozen to death in their backyard. The anger was gone. The hot rage had cooled, leaving behind a cold, empty space and a frightening clarity. It was like the calm after a high fever, when everything suddenly comes into sharp focus. The velvet curtain of motherhood, of sacrifice and blind hope that I had draped over my eyes for years, had finally been ripped away. I was seeing my son, Kevin, and his wife, Tiffany, for what they truly were: 2 selfish, shallow people wrapped in a thin veneer of success that I myself had woven for them. Slowly, I took off the soaked coat, letting it fall to the floor like a shed skin. Then, I went to the small suitcase I always brought for overnight stays. I didn't turn on the light. The darkness felt like my only friend right now. My trembling hands fumbled in the side pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth with age. It was my late husband John's memory box. I opened the lid. The familiar scent of cedar and old paper filled my nostrils, bringing with it a warm wave of memories. Inside were a few small things: his old wristwatch, his reading glasses with one arm broken, and a few faded photographs. I picked up a picture of us on our honeymoon in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We were so young then, standing in front of an old adobe church, smiling brightly under the blazing Sunday. John had loved it there. He always dreamed of going back someday, building a small house, and living out his golden years in the peace and light of the desert. "We'll get there, Martha," he used to say. "When Kevin is settled, when we're all done, we'll go." But done never seemed to come. There was always another student loan to pay, a down payment for a first apartment, a lavish wedding, a new business that needed capital. And then, John was gone, taken by a sudden heart attack, leaving me alone with unfinished promises and a son who had never truly grown up. Underneath the photos was a yellowed envelope. I pulled out a letter, John's handwriting still strong and clear. He'd written it a few weeks before he died, when he knew his heart was failing. I'd read it 100 times, but tonight, the words seemed to take on a whole new meaning, the weight of destiny. "My dearest Martha," the letter began, "if you're reading this again, it's probably because you're feeling lonely, or perhaps because our boy has done something to upset you again. You know, I always understood him. Kevin has my ambition, but he lacks your heart. He sees the world as a series of transactions, a race he has to win, no matter the cost. I had hoped your love would soften him, teach him about compassion and gratitude, but I'm afraid I overestimated the power of love and underestimated the power of selfishness." I paused, taking a shaky breath. Tears began to well up, not of sadness, but of the painful accuracy of John's insight. He had seen it all. I tried to protect you, Martha. I worked my whole life not just to give you a comfortable life, but to give you independence. I left you not just love, but a tool for your own defense. You'll know when it's time to use it. Remember Santa Fe, Martha. Remember the sunshine and the warm adobe walls. That's a place for new beginnings, not sad endings. And promise me, when the time comes to choose between his happiness and your peace, you will always choose yourself. It isn't selfish, it's survival. My legacy isn't the money for him to waste. It's your safety and your freedom. Love you forever, John. I folded the letter, hot tears tracing paths down my cheeks. The promise I had promised him. And for the past 4 years, I had broken that promise. I had chosen Kevin's happiness, or rather, the illusion of happiness he and his wife pursued. I had chosen to be a silent shadow, a bottomless bank account in exchange for fake smiles and obligatory Christmas invitations. Tonight, that changed. The promise was no longer a whisper from the past. It was a command, a call to action. I stood up and walked to the window. The blizzard outside was still howling, but inside me, a strange calm had settled. I looked at my reflection in the cold glass. A 66-year-old woman, etched with the lines of time and exhaustion, but with a newly kindled fire in her eyes. Down below, the living room lights went out. They must have gone to bed, their bellies full, their minds at ease, without a single thought for the mother they had left out in the snow. A plan began to form in my mind, as clear and precise as the way I used to organize nursing shifts at the hospital. Step by step, detail by detail. It wasn't a plan of revenge fueled by anger, but a surgical procedure, an act of excising the malignant tumor of dependency and ingratitude that had been eating away at my family for years. Step 1. Samuel Jones. I needed to call him first thing in the morning. Samuel wasn't just John's lawyer, he was his best friend, the only other person who knew about the tool John had left behind. Step 2. Finances. I had to completely untangle my assets from their lives. A quiet but thorough audit. Step 3. The destination, Santa Fe. It was no longer a distant dream, it was an order. Step 4. The letter. I would not leave in silence. They needed to know, not to make them feel remorse, because I knew that was impossible, but to make them understand the consequences of their actions, to let them know that the comfortable rug under their feet was about to be pulled out. I stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the white darkness. Tiffany's voice echoed in my head, "It's your own fault." Maybe she was right, but in a way she could never comprehend. It was my fault for giving so much without demanding respect. It was my fault for loving so blindly that I had enabled my son to become a freeloader. It was my fault for staying silent for so long. But that silence was about to end. I went back to the bed, but not to sleep. I pulled a small table close, took out a notepad and a pen from my purse. In the dim light of my phone, I began to outline my plan. Every number, every bank account, every bill I had paid for the last 4 years. The mortgage, the school tuition, the insurance, the car leases, the luxury vacations, the designer clothes. It all began to take shape, a silent indictment of a life built on my sacrifice. I didn't sleep at all that night. As the first light of Christmas Day began to creep through the window, painting the room in shades of white, I had finished the detailed blueprint for my new life. Outside, the snow had stopped. A deep peace had settled over the landscape, and for the first time in years, I felt a similar peace settling in my own soul. It was the peace of an unshakable decision. I was ready. Christmas morning breakfast was strangely quiet. The loud, fake cheer of the night before had evaporated, leaving behind a fog of awkwardness and avoidance. Kevin and Tiffany tried to act as if nothing had happened. Tiffany chatted about their upcoming ski trip to Aspen in January. Kevin scrolled through business news on his phone, but they both avoided making direct eye contact with me. Maybe, in some dark corner of their conscience, they felt a sliver of shame. Or maybe, they simply didn't know what to say to someone they had just treated like a forgotten piece of furniture. I said nothing either. I just quietly ate my pancakes and drank my coffee. I watched them, not as a mother, but as a scientist observing subjects. I saw the restlessness in the way Kevin tapped his fingers on the table, the tension in Tiffany's forced smile as she tried to make conversation with the children. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the disruption to the atmosphere. My silence unnerved them because it broke the familiar script where I was always the one to forgive, to smooth things over. Right after breakfast, I stood up and announced calmly, "I think I'll head home now. I have a few things to take care of." Kevin looked up from his phone, surprised. "So soon, Mom? You always stay through the holiday." "This year is different," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. Tiffany stood nearby, her arms crossed. "Are you still upset about last night?" "I told you, it was just a misunderstanding. Everyone just got a little carried away." "I'm not upset," I said, and it was the truth. I was past anger. What I felt now was a cold resolve. I just realized I have a life of my own that needs my attention. I didn't wait for their reply. I went upstairs, packed my few things into my small suitcase, and came back down. Lily ran to hug me. "Are you really going, Grandma?" she asked, her voice sad. I knelt down, looking directly into my granddaughter's clear eyes. "I have to, sweetie, but I will always love you." I kissed her on the forehead, a silent farewell to the only person in this family who still possessed kindness. On the drive home, I didn't cry. I just focused on the road ahead, where the snowplows had already cleared a path, revealing the black asphalt beneath. The sky was an unusually brilliant blue after the storm, just like my mind. As soon as I got back to my own quiet little house, the first thing I did was call Samuel Jones. He picked up on the second ring. "Martha, Merry Christmas." His voice was warm and familiar. "Merry Christmas, Sam. I'm sorry to bother you on a holiday, but I need to see you. As soon as possible. It's urgent." The urgency in my voice must have caught his attention. "Of course, Martha. Is everything all right? Is it Kevin?" He always knew. "It's everything, Sam. I'll be at your office tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock? "I'll be there," he said, no questions asked. The next day, I drove into downtown Chicago. Samuel's office building was on Michigan Avenue, overlooking a snow-covered Millennium Park. When I walked into his elegant but cozy office, Samuel was waiting with 2 cups of hot tea. He was a tall man with meticulously combed silver hair and kind, intelligent eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. He had been there when John died, helped me navigate all the complex paperwork, and had always been a trusted friend. "You look different, Martha," he said after we'd settled onto the soft leather sofa. "There's a resolution in your eyes." I didn't beat around the bush. I told him everything, concisely and without self-pity. The card, the game, and the nearly an hour spent locked out in the snow. I repeated Tiffany's accusation. "It's your own fault," as if I were presenting evidence in court. Throughout my story, Samuel just listened silently. His face grew grim, the warmth in his eyes replaced by a quiet, simmering anger. When I finished, he shook his head slowly. "John saw this coming," he said, repeating what he'd said on the phone, but this time his voice was heavy with weariness and disappointment. "That boy, he has everything, and yet he has no gratitude." "I'm not here to complain, Sam," I said directly. "I'm here to act. I want to activate the special provision in John's will." Samuel nodded, as if he'd been waiting to hear these words for a long time. He got up, walked over to the large steel safe in the corner of the room, and carefully turned the combination dial. The heavy door swung open, revealing neatly arranged files. He pulled out a thick, dark blue leather-bound portfolio and placed it on the table in front of me. "This isn't from insurance or his pension," he began to explain, though I already knew this from John's letter. John was a visionary. In his final years, when people weren't talking much about green architecture, he was quietly patenting a series of designs for energy-neutral buildings. Rainwater harvesting systems, insulation from recycled materials, designs that optimized natural light. They were years ahead of their time. He opened the portfolio. Inside were contracts, technical drawings, and numbers that made my head swim. Before he passed, a major German construction conglomerate realized the potential of these designs. They bought the rights to everything. John never told Kevin, because he was afraid a sudden fortune would ruin the boy. The entire sum was placed into a blind trust. After taxes, it's worth nearly $8 million. The number, even though I was prepared for it, was staggering. I had been living frugally all these years, drawing small amounts from what I thought were our savings, with no idea I was sitting on a fortune. And all that time, I had been quietly funding my son's extravagant life. Samuel turned to a marked page. "And this," he said, pointing to a paragraph in bold print, "is the last will of a visionary." He read the clause aloud, each word ringing with clarity in the quiet office. If, in the sole and indisputable judgment of my wife, Martha Vance, our son, Kevin Vance, engages in behavior that demonstrates profound ingratitude, disrespect, or dereliction of his duty as a son, she shall have the full authority to redirect 75% of this legacy's assets to establish a charitable foundation in our names, the John and Martha Vance Legacy Foundation for Sustainable Architecture. John wrote it very carefully, Samuel continued. Sole and indisputable judgment. That means Kevin has no legal grounds to contest your decision. It's a stroke of genius. I looked at my old friend's face. John left me a shield, Sam, but this Christmas, I realized it's not just a shield, it's also a sword. What do you need me to do, Martha? Samuel asked, his tone now all business. I want you to begin the process immediately, I said, my voice unwavering. Establish the foundation, transfer 75% of the assets. I want you to draft an official announcement. I want everything done by the book, airtight. It will take a few days, Samuel said, but I'll make it my priority. Good, I said. In the meantime, I need your help with something else. I need a detailed statement of every single payment I've made to Kevin's family for the past 4 years, from the trust account I never even knew existed. Samuel nodded, taking notes. I can get those. And finally, I said, taking a deep breath, I need you to find me a good real estate agent in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Samuel looked up, a small, sad, but understanding smile on his face. You're really going to do it. John would be so proud of you, Martha. I'm not doing it to make him proud, I replied. I'm doing it for me. I'm keeping my promise to him. When I left Samuel's office, the sun was high in the sky, casting a brilliant glare on the snow. I felt as light as if a weight I had been carrying for years had finally been lifted from my shoulders. The next few days passed in a strange mixture of external calm and a whirlwind of quiet activity. To the world, I was still Martha Vance, a widow living alone in a small house in the Chicago suburbs. But behind that door, I was orchestrating the organized migration of my own life. My phone rang constantly. Kevin called. Tiffany called. At first I would answer. Their voices were full of fake concern. Are you okay, Mom? You've barely said a word. Do you need us to come check on you? I would just reply with short, polite, but distant answers. I'm fine, just busy with a few things. My distance confused them. They were used to me being available, being the sounding board for their problems, the balm for their bruised egos. When I no longer played that role, they were at a loss. After a few half-hearted calls, they gave up. They probably thought I was just sulking and would come around soon. They couldn't imagine that my silence was the sign of a revolution, not a childish pout. Meanwhile, Samuel and I worked tirelessly. Every day, he sent me updates via secure email. The paperwork to establish the John and Martha Vance Legacy Foundation for Sustainable Architecture was moving quickly. The lawyers had drafted the charter, and an initial advisory board was being formed, including a few respected architecture professors John had admired. The bank account for the foundation was open. $6 million was waiting to be transferred. The feeling of power in directing such a large sum was foreign, but also incredibly liberating. This wasn't money for shopping or frivolous spending. This was money to build, to create opportunities, to turn John's legacy into something living and meaningful. At the same time, Samuel had found me an excellent realtor in Santa Fe, a woman named Isabella Garcia who specialized in helping retirees relocate. I had several video calls with Isabella. She had thick, salt and pepper hair and a warm smile, and she listened to my story, the edited version of course, with empathy and understanding. You need a place with light, Martha, Isabella said through the computer screen, a vibrant desert landscape behind her. Light can heal a lot of things. She sent me photos and videos of a few charming little houses in the historic district. Adobe-style homes with thick earthen walls, exposed wooden beams on the ceilings, and private courtyards filled with cacti and bougainvillea. I chose one. A small 2-bedroom house, but with a beautiful backyard that looked out onto the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. I bought it. With a few clicks and a confirmation call to Samuel, I became the owner of a home 1,000 miles away from Chicago. For the first time in my life, I had made a major financial decision for myself without having to consider how it would affect Kevin. The hardest part was packing. As I moved through the rooms of the house where John and I had lived for nearly 40 years, every object seemed to pull at me with invisible threads of memory. My mother's tea set, Kevin's childhood scribbles carefully framed, the armchair where John used to read. I had to be ruthless. I made a rule for myself. I would only take what could fit into 2 large suitcases. I left all the furniture. I left the silver service. I left the thick photo albums that chronicled a family life I now knew was only part of the story. I kept only the things that truly belonged to me and John, his wooden memory box, the books we had read together, the watercolor painting of the Lake Michigan shore that John had given me for our 20th anniversary, my old nurse's pin, a symbol of the independence and profession I had once so loved. While cleaning out John's study, I found a stack of old files. They were financial statements, credit card bills from years ago, when Kevin was in college and just starting his career. I had forgotten about them, but as I flipped through the pages, a clear pattern emerged. Lavish expenses, overspending, credit card debts that were always quietly paid off at the end of the month by an unseen hand, my hand. I had done it automatically, considering it a mother's duty. But looking back now, I saw it as a series of mistakes. I hadn't helped him. I had crippled him. I had taught him that there was always a safety net, that his actions never had real consequences. I carefully made copies of all those documents. They would be part of the file I was leaving behind. On the last day of December, Samuel called me. "Everything is ready, Martha. The foundation is officially incorporated. The money has been transferred. The detailed statement of your payments to Kevin is printed. How is your flight?" "January 3rd, I replied, my heart beating a little faster. 6 in the morning. "Have you written the letter?" "I'm writing it now," I said, looking down at the blank page in front of me. That letter was the most difficult thing. I wrote and rewrote it several times. The first version was filled with anger and accusations. The second was too sentimental, full of pain. I tore them all up. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me hurt or angry. I needed to be calm, objective, and as cold as an audit report. The final version was very short. "Kevin and Tiffany, by the time you read this letter, I will have begun a new chapter in my life. The events of this past Christmas made it abundantly clear to me that my presence in your lives has become more of a burden than a blessing. I have decided to lift that burden. For you and for me. This was not a decision made in anger. It is the result of many years of reflection, reinforced by an undeniable truth I realized that night. You deserve to have your perfect life, unencumbered by an old, sick mother. And I deserve to live my final years in peace and with dignity. I have made my own arrangements. Please do not worry about me." Attached to this letter is a portfolio. It details the financial support that you were perhaps unaware of, which has sustained your lifestyle for the past 4 years. I leave it not to demand gratitude, but simply so that you understand the full truth. For any legal matters, should they arise, please contact my attorney, Samuel Jones. He has all the necessary information. This is not an abandonment. It is a release. For all of us. Mother. I didn't sign it love, Mom. Simply Mother. A stark fact. In the pre-dawn hours of January 3rd, the house was silent. I had called a taxi the night before. My 2 suitcases stood ready by the door. I took one last walk through the house, my hand brushing lightly over familiar objects. I didn't feel sad. Just an emptiness, an acceptance that a chapter of my life had well and truly closed. I did not go to Naperville to deliver the letter. I hired a bonded courier who delivered the thick envelope at 8 a.m. The instructions were clear. Place it on the kitchen island, take a photograph as proof of delivery, and leave. A clean, impersonal transaction, a final, symbolic act representing the end of my role as their silent benefactor. The taxi arrived on time. The driver helped me with my luggage. As the car pulled away from the familiar street, I didn't look back. I was driving toward the sunrise. At O'Hare Airport, everything went smoothly. I checked in, sent my bags off, and went through security. As I sat in the waiting lounge, watching the planes take off and land, the sheer scale of what I was doing finally hit me. I, Martha Vance, at 66 years old, was leaving everything I had ever known to start completely from scratch. A small wave of panic rose in my chest. Could I really do this? But then I remembered the biting cold of that snowy night. I remembered my son's laughter. I remembered my daughter-in-law's accusation, and the panic subsided, replaced by a resolve as solid as rock. As I settled into my window seat on the plane, I turned off my old phone, the phone filled with the contacts, messages, and photos of a former life. I would buy a new one, with a new number, in Santa Fe. As the plane accelerated down the runway and slowly lifted off the ground, I looked down at the city of Chicago shrinking below. The skyscrapers, the familiar streets, Lake Michigan sparkling like a jewel, it was all receding into the past. I didn't feel loss. I felt relief. I was flying toward the promised land, flying toward the sunshine, flying toward the life John had always wanted for me, and the life I was finally brave enough to claim for myself. While I was flying through the clouds toward the sunny southwest, a normal Friday morning was dawning in Kevin and Tiffany's house in Chicago. I could picture the scene perfectly, as it had been repeated hundreds of times. Kevin, in his expensive suit, grabbing a quick espresso before rushing out to his leased BMW. Tiffany, in designer yoga pants, preparing a healthy breakfast for the kids, while also snapping the perfect photo for her blog with a caption about the balanced life of a modern mom. They still wouldn't have noticed my absence. Since our last call a few days ago, I had been silent. That silence, initially annoying, had probably been interpreted by them as my usual sulking, and they believed that with a little more time, everything would go back to normal. Mom would call again, would ask about them, would be ready to play the role of the soft cushion for all their problems. They couldn't imagine any other scenario. Their self-importance was so great that they believed they were the center of my universe, and that universe couldn't exist without them. The storm began very quietly, not with a loud bang, but with a small, trivial incident, the first crack in the perfect facade of the life they had built. It happened around 3 in the afternoon. Tiffany, after picking up the kids from school, had treated herself to a shopping afternoon on Michigan Avenue. She was in a high-end fashion boutique, holding a $3,000 handbag that she just had to have to complete her spring collection. When she handed her Platinum American Express card to the cashier, something unprecedented happened. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the young sales clerk said with a confused look. "Your card has been declined." Tiffany blinked, not believing her ears. "Declined? Impossible. There must be a mistake. Try it again." The clerk tried again. Same result. "Ma'am, the system says the transaction is not approved." Tiffany's face flushed with shame. Other women in line were starting to stare. Her image as a wealthy, stylish woman was being threatened. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, snatching the card back. "It must be a problem with your system." She hurried out of the store, without the bag, the humiliation feeling like a slap in the face. Sitting in her luxury SUV, she immediately called Kevin. "Kevin!" she yelled into the phone without a greeting. "Something's wrong with our Amex card. I was just humiliated at Neiman Marcus. You need to call the bank right now." Kevin, busy in a meeting, was annoyed. "Calm down, Tiff. You probably just maxed it out again. I'll look at it tonight." "I did not. Our limit is huge. You need to check it now." To get her off his back, Kevin put the meeting on hold and logged into their online bank account. He frowned. The credit card account wasn't showing as maxed out, but there was something strange. The monthly automatic payment, the one that always wiped their balance clean, hadn't been made on the first of the month. A massive balance from their December spending was still there, and it had pushed them over their credit limit. That's when a vague sense of unease began to creep into Kevin's mind. That automatic payment was set up from a savings account he rarely paid attention to. He had always assumed it was a joint account where his bonuses and commissions went. He clicked to see the details of that account. And then, he froze. The account holder's name was not Kevin and Tiffany Vance. It was Martha J. Vance, the Vance Family Trust. Current balance, $0. All automatic payments for the credit card, the car loans, the life insurance had been canceled on January 2nd. "What the hell is this?" Kevin muttered to himself. He tried to call me. The phone rang a few times and then went straight to voicemail. "The mailbox is full and cannot accept new messages at this time." He called again. Same result. The unease had now turned into panic. He rushed out of his office, lying about a family emergency, and drove home like a madman. When he burst into the house, Tiffany was pacing in the living room. "Did you figure it out?" she asked immediately. "It's much worse," Kevin replied, his voice hoarse. He opened his laptop on the dining table. "Look at this." Together, they stared at the screen. Line after line of information appeared, each one a new shock. They traced the other automatic payments. The leases on their 2 luxury cars, a BMW X5 for Kevin and a Range Rover for Tiffany, costing over $1,500 a month, canceled. The tuition for Lily and Noah's prestigious private school, a staggering $2,600 a month, canceled. The monthly membership fees for their exclusive golf and country club, canceled. And then, the knockout blow. The mortgage payment for the very house they were sitting in, a $1 million mansion with a monthly payment of $4,800. That automatic payment was also set up from my account, and it too had been canceled. They sat there, in their sleek, modern kitchen, staring at the computer screen as if it were a monster that had just materialized. Silence enveloped them, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. "This can't be," Tiffany whispered, her voice trembling. This has to be a mistake. Your mother, she wouldn't do this." "I've been trying to call her," Kevin said, his voice flat. "Her phone is disconnected." It was then that Kevin's eyes landed on something on the kitchen island, a thick manila envelope that he hadn't noticed in his rush to leave for work that morning. On top of it was a letter, held down by an old coffee mug, his father's mug. With shaking hands, Kevin picked up the letter. Tiffany huddled close, and they both read my short, cold words. Every word, every sentence landed like a hammer blow. A burden. Lift that burden. A release. When they finished the letter, neither of them could speak. There were no accusations, no anger. It was the calm that was the most terrifying part. It showed that this was not an impulsive act, but a calculated, deliberate decision. Then, Kevin opened the portfolio. The first page was a summary, typed neatly, probably by a lawyer. Summary of financial support from the Vance Family Trust to the family of Kevin Vance. Period. The 1st of January 2021, the 31st of December 2024. Below were the numbers, listed without mercy. Mortgage assistance payments, $230,400. Tuition payments, $124,800. Vehicle lease payments, $72,000. Credit card balance payments, estimated, $150,000. Miscellaneous, club dues, insurance, vacations, $65,000. Grand total, $642,200. Over $500,000. Tiffany sank into a chair, her head in her hands. "Oh my God," she sobbed. Kevin flipped through the following pages. They were copies of bank statements, credit card bills, tuition invoices, irrefutable proof. Every page was a reminder of a designer item, a fancy dinner, a luxury vacation, all paid for with my money. Their perfect life, the one they boasted about to their friends, the one Tiffany used to build her blogger career, was all an illusion. They weren't self-made successes. They were overgrown children, living on their mother's allowance. The house of cards they had so carefully constructed was collapsing before their very eyes, piece by piece, and they realized, with a sickening horror, that they had nothing to prop it up with. Their savings were almost non-existent. Kevin's salary, while high, was nowhere near enough to cover this lifestyle. "Where did she go?" Tiffany asked through her sobs, but the question was born of desperation, not concern. "We have to find her. We have to make her fix this." Kevin didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at the grand total on the page, over $500,000. And then he remembered. He remembered his own laughter on Christmas night. He remembered the feeling of triumph as he saw the hurt in my eyes. He remembered walking back into the house, leaving his mother out in the freezing snow. And for the first time in his adult life, Kevin Vance felt an emotion he had never truly experienced. Fear. Panic descended on Kevin and Tiffany's house like a thick fog. All weekend, they alternated between denial and terror. They called my old number dozens of times, to no avail. They left increasingly desperate voicemails. At first, it was confusion. "Mom, call me back immediately. Something is wrong with the accounts." Then came anger. "What kind of game are you playing? You can't do this to us." And finally pleading, "Mom, please, we're sorry. It was a joke. Please just come home." But their words all fell into a void. Monday arrived like a death sentence. The notifications from the bank began to pour in. Credit cards frozen, mortgage payment overdue. The kids' school sent an email reminder about the unpaid tuition. The cold, hard reality was closing in on them. In his desperation, Kevin could only think of one name mentioned in my letter: Samuel Jones. He was their last hope, the only person who might have answers, the only remaining bridge to the world from which they had just been exiled. On Monday morning, without an appointment, Kevin and Tiffany drove to Samuel's law office. They stormed into the reception area, demanding to see Mr. Jones immediately about an urgent family matter. The secretary, likely forewarned by Samuel, calmly asked them to have a seat, saying he would be with them in a few minutes. When Samuel Jones emerged, his face was a neutral mask. He didn't invite them into his plush office with the comfortable leather sofas. Instead, he led them to a small, sterile conference room with nothing but a wooden table and a few hard chairs. The unspoken message was clear. This was not a friendly chat, this was business. "Hello, Kevin, Tiffany," Samuel said, his voice even. "I assume you're here about Mrs. Vance's letter." "Where is she, Uncle Sam?" Kevin asked immediately, his anxiety bubbling over. "You have to tell us where she is. She can't just disappear. She has Parkinson's. She might not be thinking clearly." Samuel looked at Kevin with a cold, piercing gaze. "First, Kevin, your mother is perfectly lucid. Her doctor has confirmed it. Second, she is a free citizen, with the right to go wherever she pleases. And third, I am under no obligation to disclose my client's personal information to you." "Client?" Tiffany interjected, her voice high and shrill. "She's my mother-in-law. We're her family." "Family?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "A family doesn't leave their mother outside in a snowstorm for an hour, do they?" The statement landed like a bucket of ice water, silencing them both. They realized Samuel knew everything. There was no playing the part of worried children here. Kevin switched tactics, his voice turning pleading. "Uncle Sam, we know we messed up. Christmas was a terrible mistake. We'll do anything to fix it. We just need to talk to her. Please, help us." Samuel let out a long sigh, one filled with years of accumulated disappointment. "It's too late for that, Kevin. You had 42 years to treat your mother with kindness. You had 4 years, since your father passed, to show an ounce of gratitude. You chose not to." He stood up and walked to a file cabinet in the corner. "You came here for answers. Very well, I'll give you answers. But I'm afraid they aren't the ones you want to hear." He placed a hard-bound, professionally assembled portfolio on the table. It looked official, final. The gold-embossed letters on the cover jumped out at them. Certificate of Incorporation. The John and Martha Vance Legacy Foundation for Sustainable Architecture. Kevin and Tiffany looked at each other, completely baffled. "What foundation?" Kevin asked, his voice full of dread. Samuel didn't answer right away. He just calmly opened the portfolio. "Your father, Kevin, was an extraordinary man. He wasn't just a brilliant architect, he was a brilliant judge of character. He loved you, but he also understood your weaknesses. He knew that a great fortune would be more likely to destroy you than to help you." He pushed a document toward them. It was a copy of the special provision in John's will. They read it, first quickly, then slowing down as each word sank in like poison. "In the sole and indisputable judgment of my wife, Martha Vance. Behavior that demonstrates profound ingratitude, disrespect, full authority to redirect 75% of the assets. To establish a charitable foundation." Kevin's face went white as a sheet. He looked up at Samuel, his eyes wide with horror. 75%. Of what?" "Of the entire legacy your father left, Kevin," Samuel said flatly. "The full proceeds from the sale of his patents, the money your mother has been using to fund your lifestyle for the last 4 years." "How? How much was it?" Tiffany whispered, the question barely audible. Samuel looked them straight in the eyes, without a trace of pity. "After its establishment, the initial endowment of the foundation is $6 million. $6 million. The number hung in the air of the stuffy conference room. Tiffany's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Kevin felt as if all the air had been sucked from his lungs. $6 million. A life-changing amount of money. Money that had been within their grasp. And now it was gone, redirected to some faceless architecture students. "Your father's legacy, Kevin," Samuel continued, his voice softening slightly with emotion as he spoke of his old friend, "will not be used to buy designer handbags or pay for country club memberships. It will be used to fund scholarships for talented but underprivileged young people, people who actually understand the value of an opportunity, people who will carry on his legacy of building a better world." "No," Kevin mumbled, shaking his head as if to ward off the truth. "No, she can't do that. It's our money. A father's legacy is for his son." "No, Kevin," Samuel said, his voice turning sharp as steel. "Your father's legacy was for his wife. He entrusted her with the final decision, and she has decided. That Christmas night, when you laughed at her, when you left her in the snow, you didn't just break a mother's heart. You signed your own financial death warrant. You triggered that clause with your own cruelty." Samuel stood up, a clear sign that the meeting was over. "Your mother has left you the remaining 25%, roughly $2 million, but that money has been placed in a separate, tightly controlled trust. It will be used to cover your mother's future healthcare needs, and if there is any remainder, it will be divided among my grandchildren, Lily and Noah, when they turn 18. You and Tiffany will not see a single penny." Kevin shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. "This is theft. I'll sue. I'll sue you. I'll sue my own mother." "Be my guest," Samuel replied calmly. "Take your ingratitude to a court of law. Tell the judge about the Christmas card. Explain why your mother felt she had to flee the city. I'm sure the press would love that story. Marketing VP sues ailing, widowed mother with Parkinson's over $6 million fortune. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" The threat hit Kevin right where he lived. Image, reputation, it was everything to them. He collapsed back into his chair, utterly defeated. As they stumbled out of the law office, the world seemed to have changed. The Chicago sky was still gray, the crowd still hurried, but for Kevin and Tiffany, everything had lost its color. They hadn't just lost money. They had lost a future they had always taken for granted. The inheritance they thought was their birthright had, in fact, never belonged to them at all. The truth about the John and Martha Vance Legacy Foundation wasn't just a financial shock. It was a psychological annihilation. Kevin and Tiffany returned home not as husband and wife, but as co-conspirators in a catastrophic failure. The luxurious house was no longer a symbol of success, but a bitter reminder of what they'd lost. The silence between them wasn't awkwardness anymore. It was pure accusation. Every glance held the unspoken question, whose fault is this? For the next few days, they lived like ghosts in their own home. They fought. Tiffany blamed Kevin's stupid cruelty. Arguing his laughter on Christmas night was the straw that broke the camel's back. Kevin attacked Tiffany's vanity and endless demands, claiming the pressure to maintain their lavish lifestyle had made him callous. They tore into each other because admitting it was their shared fault was too painful. But amid the anger and desperation, a toxic idea began to sprout in Kevin's mind. A final plan, a desperate gambit born from his bruised ego and his habit of being in control. "She's sick," he said to Tiffany one evening, his voice low and calculating. "Parkinson's. It affects the brain. Samuel Jones could have manipulated her. Or maybe she really isn't of sound mind anymore. We're not ungrateful children trying to grab money. We are responsible children trying to protect our ailing mother from her own poor decisions." It was a complete fabrication, but they clung to it like a life raft. It recast them from villains into heroes, at least in their own minds. The plan was simple. They would find me, confront me, and if I wouldn't listen to reason, they would use my health condition to challenge my decision in court, to file for guardianship. Meanwhile, in Santa Fe, my life was blossoming in ways I had never imagined. I had moved into my new home. It was a space filled with light, where the thick adobe walls kept the house cool during the day and warm at night. Every morning, I woke up to the sunrise painting the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in shades of pink. The tremor in my left hand seemed to have quieted significantly in the dry, warm air. The chronic stress that had been my constant companion for years seemed to have evaporated into the vast blue New Mexico sky. I spent my days exploring the city. I strolled around the Central Plaza, visited the art galleries, and found a small, cozy coffee shop with a courtyard shaded by trees. It was there I began to journal, writing down the thoughts and feelings I had suppressed for so many years. It was in that coffee shop, on a sunny afternoon, that I received the email from Samuel. "Dear Martha," he wrote, "I'm afraid we have a problem. Kevin has hired a private investigator. They're good. I expect they will find you soon." He has also been consulting with another lawyer about the possibility of filing for guardianship, citing your health. Be prepared, he's not going down without a fight. I read the email, but I didn't feel fear, just a weariness. But then, that weariness was quickly replaced by a firm resolve. I had come too far to turn back now. I would not let their toxicity poison the new world I was building. As Samuel predicted, 2 days later, as I was sitting at my usual table in the coffee shop, a stranger approached me. He was wearing a business suit and looked out of place in the relaxed, artistic setting of Santa Fe. "Mrs. Vance?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, not surprised at all. "My name is Paul Steinberg. I'm a private investigator. Your son, Kevin, hired me. He's very worried about you. He and his wife are at a hotel nearby. They would like to speak with you." I looked at the man, then out at the sun-drenched courtyard. Bright pink bougainvillea blossoms cascaded over an adobe wall. I took a deep breath. It was time. "All right," I said, "but not at the hotel. Here, right now, and I'd like you to stay as a witness." The investigator seemed surprised by my calmness, but he nodded and took out his phone. A few minutes later, Kevin and Tiffany walked into the coffee shop. They looked tired and haggard. Their usual polish was gone, replaced by a raw tension and desperation. When they saw me, sitting there peacefully with a cup of chamomile tea, they seemed stunned. They had probably expected to find a frail, confused old woman who would be easily manipulated. The picture I presented did not fit the narrative they had constructed for themselves. They sat down across from me, the investigator taking a seat at the next table, close enough to hear everything. "Mom," Kevin began, trying to keep his voice modulated with concern. "Thank God we found you. We've been worried sick." "Really, Kevin?" I asked, my voice calm. "When did the worrying start? Was it after Tiffany's credit card was declined?" My direct question flustered them. Tiffany looked down at the table. "Mom, let's not talk about that," Kevin said, trying to steer the conversation. "We're here because we're concerned about your health. You're sick. You shouldn't be alone in a strange place like this. You need to be taken care of." "I am being very well taken care of," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "I have an excellent neurologist here. I've joined a yoga class for people with Parkinson's. The climate is good for me, and most importantly, I am no longer under stress. My tremors have decreased significantly since I left you." "But the foundation," Tiffany blurted out, unable to contain herself. $6 million, Martha. That's family money. You can't just throw it away on strangers. First, Tiffany, my name is not Martha to you. And second, it was not family money. It was John's legacy, and he gave me sole discretion over it. And third, I didn't throw it away. I am investing in the future, in deserving young people, something I should have done with my own son years ago. The sharpness in my words seemed to stun Kevin. He was not used to me fighting back. "You're not thinking clearly," he said, his voice starting to take on a hard edge. "It must be the illness, or that old lawyer Samuel has brainwashed you. We're not going to let this stand. We will go to court. We will file for guardianship. We will prove that you are not competent to make these kinds of decisions." The final threat was out. It hung in the quiet air of the coffee shop. And then, I smiled. A real, genuine smile. The first one they had seen from me in a very long time. "Go ahead, Kevin," I said, my voice now holding not a trace of a tremor, but the firmness of steel. "Take me to court. Stand up in front of a judge and claim that your mother has been cognitively impaired for the last 4 years. Please, do." I paused, letting my words sink in. "But remember this. If I was truly incompetent, then by law, I was also incompetent to gift you over $600,000 during that same period. Every one of those transactions would be voided. All that money would become a debt that you would have to repay to my protected estate. My lawyer has already prepared the paperwork. And if that's not enough," I continued, looking him dead in the eye, "then listen to this. Tell the judge about your Christmas card. Show them the security camera footage from your front door, the footage that shows your mother being left in a snowstorm for 58 minutes. Let's just see who the court declares is lacking in human competency." Silence. Kevin just sat there, his mouth agape, his face draining of all color. He was checkmated. Every escape route was blocked. He had underestimated me. He had underestimated my preparation. He had underestimated the mother he had always considered weak and pliable. Tiffany began to cry, harsh, desperate sobs. "We're going to lose everything," she wept. I looked at them one last time, not with anger, but with a cold pity. "You already lost everything that Christmas night," I said softly. "It just took you this long to realize it." I stood up, leaving money for my tea on the table. I nodded to the private investigator, who was looking at me with undisguised respect. Then I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, into the bright Santa Fe sun, leaving behind two people drowning in the ashes of the world they had set on fire themselves. The meeting at the Santa Fe coffee shop wasn't a battle, it was an execution, quick, precise, and with no escape. As I walked away, leaving Kevin and Tiffany stunned amidst the wreckage of their final, desperate plan, I knew that chapter of my life was well and truly over. There would be no more threats, no more attempts at manipulation. There was only the stark truth and its irreversible consequences. I never heard from them directly again. What I learned came through Samuel, who kept me updated in a professional and discreet manner, not out of gossip, but because the legalities of the grandchildren's trust still needed to be managed. Their downfall was faster than I had imagined. They didn't go to court. My threat had worked. Kevin knew a public lawsuit would be career suicide. Without the secret river of money propping them up, they were forced to face reality. A for sale sign appeared on the manicured lawn of the Naperville mansion just 2 weeks later. They couldn't afford the massive mortgage, and the bank showed no mercy. Samuel told me they had to sell at a loss for a quick sale, barely breaking even after paying off the bank, with little left over. Their glamorous world disintegrated. The BMW and Range Rover were repossessed. The country club membership was revoked for non-payment. And then, the worst happened. Whispers about Kevin's financial trouble began to circulate in his professional circles. In an industry where image is everything, financial weakness is seen as a sign of failure. When his company went through a round of restructuring, his position as Vice President of Marketing, a role created and sustained in part by social connections greased with my money, was unceremoniously eliminated. Kevin, at 42 years old, was, for the first time in his life, truly unemployed with no safety net. Tiffany fared no better. Her family lifestyle blog quickly lost its appeal without lavish European vacations or the latest designer bags to show off. Photos taken in a cramped, shabby rental apartment in a less affluent suburb just didn't attract high-end brand deals. Her sponsorship contracts dried up one by one. The virtual empire she had built on Instagram crumbled like a sandcastle against the tide. Samuel mentioned that their marriage was hanging by a thread. Without money and social status to act as glue, all the cracks, resentments, and contempt they had for each other over the years were laid bare. They were trapped in a vicious cycle of blame and bitterness. Each looked at the other and saw a reflection of their own failure. Hearing this news, I felt no glee, no sense of victory. I just felt a deep, hollow sadness. A sadness for the boy I once loved, for the man he could have become if I hadn't enabled him, if I had taught him the value of hard work and gratitude, instead of handing him everything so easily. I had reaped what I had sown, and now, so were they. It was a tragic lesson for us all. While their world was turning to ash, my life in Santa Fe was being reborn in vibrant color. I was no longer a shadow, an invisible benefactor. I had become a builder. I threw myself into the work of the John and Martha Vance Legacy Foundation. I didn't just sit on a board, I got involved. I worked with the architecture departments at the University of New Mexico to set up the scholarship criteria. I read every application, stories of passionate, talented young people from difficult backgrounds. They reminded me of John and me when we were young, with nothing but big dreams in our pockets. I decided the foundation wouldn't just give out money. We would create a mentorship program. I invited successful architects, old friends of John's, to participate. And I, Martha Vance, former head nurse, became an unlikely but enthusiastic mentor myself. I didn't teach them about structures or materials. I talked to them about life, about perseverance, about the importance of building not just buildings, but relationships based on respect and integrity. I met our first scholarship recipients, a young Navajo woman who wanted to design sustainable housing for her reservation, a young man from a rough neighborhood in Albuquerque who had taught himself drafting on old computers at the public library. In their eyes, I saw a genuine gratitude, a fire of passion that I hadn't seen in my son's eyes for a very long time. My health improved too. I joined a support group for people with Parkinson's at a local community center. There, I wasn't a sickly grandma or a burden, I was just Martha. We shared stories, tips for managing symptoms, and most importantly, we laughed. We laughed about spilling coffee from a shaky hand, about our feet freezing up at the most awkward moments. That laughter was the best medicine. It took away the disease's power. I made friends. Real friends. There was Isabella, the realtor, who became my morning walk companion. There was Maria, a local potter, who taught me how to work with clay, a wonderful therapy for my hands. And there was Samuel, who came to visit a few times, not as a lawyer, but as an old friend sharing memories of John. We'd sit on my porch, drinking iced tea and watching the sun set behind the mountains. John would have loved this, Samuel said on one visit. I know, I replied, a peaceful smile on my face. I feel like he's here with me. And it was true. By living his legacy the way he intended, I felt closer to him than ever. I wasn't just getting by. I was living a life of purpose. I had found a new family, one bound not by blood, but by respect, empathy, and a shared goal. One afternoon, while sorting through some old books, I found a quote by Georgia O'Keeffe, the famous painter who spent much of her life in New Mexico. She wrote, "I've been absolutely terrified every moment of my life, and I've never let it keep me from doing a single thing I wanted to do." Time in Santa Fe has its own rhythm. It doesn't rush by like it did in Chicago. It seems to soak into the landscape, into the warm adobe walls, into the changing colors of the desert sky at sunset. 5 years passed, not as lost time, but as a gift received. At 71, I felt more alive than ever. The Parkinson's was still there, an unwanted companion I had learned to live with peacefully. My left hand trembled more, my steps were sometimes slower, but my spirit was clearer and stronger than at any other point in my life. The John and Martha Vance Legacy Foundation had become my passion and my living legacy. We had funded dozens of students, and John's kids, as I fondly called them, were beginning to make their own marks on the world of architecture. Occasionally, I would see their work featured in trade magazines, energy-efficient community centers, cleverly designed urban gardens, innovative low-cost housing projects. Each time, a warm pride would swell in my heart, a pride that was clean and untainted by expectation or disappointment. This was continuation. I had almost stopped thinking about Kevin and Tiffany. They belonged to another world, a book that had been read and placed neatly on a shelf. The only remaining connection was the trust I had set up for my grandchildren, Lily and Noah, managed by Samuel. He sent me a report each year, and I signed off on it without hesitation. It was my promise to the innocent children in this story. Then, one morning in May, as I was watering the chili plants in my small garden, an email arrived that broke the familiar peace. It wasn't from Samuel. It was from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was a single word, Grandma. My heart skipped a beat. I wiped my hands on my apron, went inside, and sat down at my computer, feeling a child's anticipation. I opened the email. It was from Lily. "Dear Grandma," the letter began, her voice in writing much more mature than a 16-year-old's. "I'm not sure if you will get this, or if you will want to read it. Mom and Dad don't know I'm writing this. I found the foundation's email address online, and I'm hoping it reaches you. I'm 16 now. A lot has changed since I last saw you. We don't live in the house in Naperville anymore. We live in a much smaller apartment. Dad doesn't work at his old company. Mom works part-time at a department store. Things are different. They never talk about you. Your name is like a forbidden word in our house. But I remember you reading stories to me. I remember your oatmeal cookies, and I remember that last Christmas. I remember the look on your face when you read that card. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I was too little to know what to say, but I knew it was wrong. I had to stop, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a sob. The tears I hadn't cried in 5 years began to flow, hot and cleansing. I read on. Recently, I had a school project to research a person I admire in the community. I chose John Vance, my grandpa. I learned about the foundation in his and your name. I read about his designs, his vision for sustainable architecture, and I saw your name everywhere, as the founder, the chairperson. I read articles about you, about how you're helping young students. I'm so proud, Grandma, so proud to be your granddaughter. I understand that things happen that I will probably never fully understand. I'm not writing to ask you to come back or to forgive anyone. I just wanted you to know that there's someone in Chicago who thinks about you. And I wanted to thank you. Thank you for teaching me the most important lesson, not with words, but with your actions. You taught me that sometimes, building something new and beautiful is more important than trying to fix what's broken. You taught me about self-respect and strength. I hope someday I can build things that matter, like you and Grandpa did. I'm thinking of applying to architecture school. I love you, Lily. I sat in front of the screen for a long time after I finished reading, letting every word sink into my soul. Lily's letter wasn't just a message from the past, it was a bridge built not on forced apologies or financial need, but on genuine understanding and pure love. My legacy with John, it wasn't just in buildings or scholarships, it was sprouting in the heart of this granddaughter, the seed of kindness, of self-worth, of the desire to create value. It had managed to push through the barren soil of bitterness and selfishness to find a place to grow. I answered Lily's email that afternoon. I didn't write about the pain or the anger. I told her about John, about his dreams. I told her about Santa Fe, the color of the sky, the smell of pinyon pine after a rainstorm. I encouraged her to pursue her architectural dreams. And I ended with a single sentence. My door in Santa Fe is always open to you, Lily. Whenever you're ready. It was a beginning, not a return to the past, but a new way forward. I realized I could love my grandchild without having to be entangled in the toxicity of her parents. I could be a grandmother, on my own terms, from a distance, through letters and calls, and one day perhaps, visits. This new relationship with Lily was like a clear stream flowing into my life. It filled a space I didn't even realize was empty. It reminded me that family isn't always a rigid definition of people under one roof. Sometimes, it's the invisible threads of love and understanding, threads that can stretch for 1,000 miles. A few months later, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was a carefully handcrafted architectural model. It was a small, Adobe-style house with a courtyard and large windows looking out on an imaginary mountain scene. A small note was attached. This was my final project, Lily wrote. I called it the House of Light. I was thinking of you when I made it. I placed the model on my fireplace mantel, in a place of honor. It stood there, a tangible symbol of rebirth. A reminder that even from the coldest ashes, the seeds of love and hope can find the light and rise. My 10th winter in Santa Fe arrived gently. Unlike the harsh gray winters of Chicago I remembered, winter here had a crisp beauty. The sky was still a brilliant blue, the air dry and cold, and occasionally a light dusting of snow would cover the desert, creating a magical contrast between the white of the snow and the red of the earth. I was 76 years old now. My steps were slower, and the tremor in my left hand was an inseparable part of me, but my mind, strangely, was sharper than ever. I had learned to accept my body's limitations and find strength in other things. My relationship with Lily had blossomed. We had moved beyond emails to weekly video calls. She was now a 21-year-old young woman, a senior in a prestigious architecture program. She had John's eyes, intelligent, deep, and always alight with a curiosity about the world. Every time I spoke with her, I saw a part of my beloved husband come alive again. She would tell me about her projects, her demanding professors, the all-nighters spent finishing models. I would tell her about the work at the foundation, the new students we were funding, the community projects they were undertaking. We were two women at opposite ends of life, connected by a shared legacy of love and creation. That Thanksgiving, Lily made good on her promise. She flew to Santa Fe, all by herself, to visit me. When I met her at the airport and saw this tall, beautiful young woman with long dark hair walking toward me, my heart swelled with an emotion I couldn't name. It was joy and pride and a strange sense of completion. We had a wonderful week together. I took her to the places John and I had visited on our honeymoon. We strolled through the art galleries on Canyon Road, ate at cozy little restaurants, and spent hours just sitting on my porch, watching the light change on the mountains. She told me a little about life in Chicago, not to complain, but simply to state facts. Her parents were still together, more like roommates than a married couple. Her father, Kevin, worked a modest sales job. He had become quiet and irritable. Her mother, Tiffany, still worked at the department store. The glamour was completely gone, replaced by a weary resignation. Her younger brother, Noah, was having some trouble in school. They were paying the price for their choices, a long, drawn-out price. "Are you angry with them?" I asked her one evening, as we baked oatmeal cookies from my old recipe. Lily thought for a long moment before answering. "I'm not angry, Grandma. I'm just sad. Sad for the life they could have had. Sad that they didn't appreciate what they had. But I've also learned that I can't live their lives for them. I have to live my own." Her wisdom astonished me. She had learned the lesson it took me more than 60 years to figure out. On her last day, Lily handed me a large portfolio. "This is your Thanksgiving present," she said, her cheeks slightly pink. I opened it. Inside was a complete, professionally rendered architectural design. The title of the project read, "The Martha Vance Center for Community and Therapeutic Gardens." It was a beautiful design, a low-slung building that blended with the desert landscape, using sustainable materials and maximizing natural light. There were spaces for yoga and physical therapy classes, a small art gallery for local artists, and a sprawling therapeutic garden specifically designed for people with mobility challenges. "I designed it for my senior thesis," Lily explained, her voice a little nervous. "I was thinking about you and your friends from your Parkinson's support group. I wanted to create a place where people could find healing, both for the body and the spirit, a place like your home has become for me." I looked at the designs, then at my beloved granddaughter. The tears came again, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated happiness. The legacy had come full circle. It had started with John's love for me, been nurtured by me into a foundation to help others, and now it had inspired the next generation to create something even more beautiful and humane. After Lily went back to Chicago, I presented her project to the foundation's board. They were blown away. We decided to fund the construction of the center, right here in Santa Fe. It would be our largest and most meaningful project yet. Today, as I sit here in my small home office, writing these final words, I can look out the window and see the plot of land where the center is beginning to take shape. The earth movers are grading the land. The surveyors are staking out the foundation. A new beginning. I have lived a long and not always easy life. I have known deep love and profound loss, quiet sacrifice and bitter betrayal. But I regret none of it, not even that cold Christmas night. Because without that night, I would never have found my way to the Sunday. I pick up a pen. My left hand trembles, but I steady it with my right. I'm going to write a letter. Not a letter of accusation or explanation, but a letter to the future. A letter to be placed in the cornerstone of the center. To whoever finds this, I write, "My name is Martha Vance. I have lived, I have loved, and I have learned that the greatest legacy we can leave is not in money or property. It is in the strength to begin again. Know your own value, demand respect, be kind, but never let your kindness be mistaken for weakness. And remember, even in the coldest, darkest winter night, the sun will rise again. You just have to be brave enough to walk toward the light. Build not just buildings, but bridges of understanding and compassion. Build a life that matters. Don't ever let anyone tell you it's too late to change. I started over at 66, and it was the best thing I ever did for myself." I fold the letter and place it in a small copper box. Tomorrow, I will take it to the construction site. It will lie there, beneath the foundation of a building born of love and resilience, a whisper to the future. I look out the window one last time. The sun is setting, painting the sky in glorious colors. A peaceful smile finds my lips. My legacy is not forgotten. It is being built, as solid as the mountains and as brilliant as the Santa Fe sunset. And that is enough. When you've lived long enough, you realize that life isn't a series of separate chapters, but a continuous river. The waves of the past always wash up on the shores of the present, shaping the landscape where you stand. I no longer try to build walls to stop those waves. Instead, I've learned to listen to their music. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't about revenge, but about release. For years, I had chained myself to a role, the sacrificial mother. I thought that love meant giving endlessly, even when it drained me completely. But I was wrong. True love isn't a one-way transaction, it's a mutual respect. When that respect is gone, what's left isn't love, but a toxic bond. And the greatest act of self-love is sometimes having the courage to cut those bonds. I didn't ruin Kevin's life. I simply stopped funding a version of it that he was not strong enough to carry on his own. I took away the crutch he had leaned on for far too long, forcing him, for the first time, to try and stand on his own 2 feet. It was a harsh lesson, and perhaps it came too late, but it was the only one that could save him from his own weakness. Sometimes, through Lily's piecemeal stories, I can picture their life now. Kevin, after a long struggle with odd jobs, finally found a stable position at a small insurance firm. There are no more designer suits or fancy cars. He lives in a rental, drives an old sedan, and works harder than he ever has in his life. Lily says he's changed. The arrogance is gone, replaced by a quiet weariness and a deep, unspoken sadness. Occasionally, in a rare moment, he'll tell Lily, "Be good to people, kid. Don't ever take anything for granted." I don't know if it's true remorse, but it is, at least, a seed of awareness. Tiffany is still struggling. She could never adapt to a life without glamour. Their relationship, as Lily describes it, is like 2 icebergs floating near each other in a cold ocean of shared disappointment. They didn't divorce, perhaps because they lacked the energy for another major upheaval. They are stuck with each other, bound by their own bad choices. I feel no pity for them, but I no longer feel hate, either. They are simply a part of the past, like an illness I was lucky enough to recover from. My grandson, Noah, is a teenager now. He's had to grow up too fast in a stressful environment. I hope the trust I left for him will give him a better start when he comes of age, and I hope that Lily, with her strength and clarity, will be a good example for him. And I, Martha Vance, am living. Truly living. Every morning, I wake up and the first thing I do is look out my window and feel gratitude. Gratitude for the Sunday, gratitude for the blue sky, gratitude for another day to breathe, to love, to contribute. The foundation and the community center have become my family and my purpose. I have found joy not in having, but in giving with intention. My philosophy now is simple: tend your own garden. For years, I tried to cultivate a barren plot of land, pouring all my water and energy into it and getting nothing back. Now, I have found my own fertile ground here in Santa Fe. I cultivate my friendships, I cultivate young talent, and most importantly, I cultivate peace in my own soul. I sit on my porch, a light wool blanket over my knees, looking toward the construction site where our center is taking shape. It's not just brick and mortar, it's a symbol of a rebuilt life. Lily will be graduating soon and will come here to oversee the final stages of her first project. The circle will be complete. I take a sip of my chamomile tea, feeling the warmth spread through me. My left hand still trembles, but my right hand is steady. I no longer look to the future with anxiety or to the past with regret. I am simply here, now, in this moment. A light breeze drifts by, carrying the scent of sage and damp earth. I smile. I have found my home. Not a home made of wood and stone, but one built of self-respect, freedom, and true, honest love. Thank you for listening to the whole story. If you connected with it, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, drop a comment below with your thoughts or your own story. Let's keep the empathy and sharing going.